Monica stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the strap of her red gown, her heart racing with excitement. It was December in Lagos, a month filled with promises of endless fun, parties, and most importantly, money. The city was alive with the hum of celebrations, the streets buzzing with the laughter of those who had made it in life. Monica had big dreams, and she was determined to be part of the magic of Lagos. She ran a hand through her hair, smoothing the curls that framed her face. In the reflection, her dark eyes sparkled with youthful energy and ambition. Her phone buzzed on the table and she quickly picked it up. It was a call from her mother. "Monica, please don't go out tonight." Her mother's voice crackled through the phone, a hint of worry in her tone. "I know it's December, but you don't know these people. Stay safe, my dear." Monica sighed but smiled, already knowing what her mother would say. She loved her mother dearly, but the older woman could be overprotective. "Mom, relax. It's just a party. Everyone is going. It's December, there's money to make." Monica replied, her voice filled with excitement. She had worked hard for this moment. She knew she could make it big if she played her cards right. Her mother paused for a moment before responding, "I just want you to be careful. People can be different in Lagos. Don't be fooled by appearances." "I'll be fine, Mum. I promise." Monica hung up, slipping her phone into her clutch bag. Her heart fluttered as she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. Lagos was known for its extravagant parties, especially during the holiday season. It was where the city's influencers, entrepreneurs, and celebrities came together to show off their wealth and celebrate the end of another year. Monica was determined to be among them. As she made her way to the venue, the streets of Lagos looked like they were glowing. The tall buildings, the bright lights, the luxury cars driving by, it was the world she dreamed of. She felt as though she was finally on the verge of stepping into the life she had always wanted. She was ready for it. When she arrived at the party, the penthouse in Enkay, she could hardly contain her excitement. The place was beautiful, with large glass windows overlooking the city, the lights of Lagos twinkling like stars. She walked through the grand entrance, smiling and greeting everyone she passed. The air was filled with the laughter of guests, the clinking of glasses, and the upbeat sound of music. The party was in full swing, and Monica felt like she had found her place. She was welcomed by the host, a famous influencer who gave her a warm hug. Monica had spent months following this person's social media accounts, learning everything about the lavish lifestyle they portrayed. Now she was part of it. She couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. She had arrived. The music changed, and Monica found herself dancing with a group of people near the bar. The mood was light, filled with joy and carefree laughter. Everyone seemed so confident, so rich, as if their lives were perfect. Monica joined in, laughing and dancing without a care in the world. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. She forgot about the struggles, the bills that needed to be paid, and the long hours she spent working just to get by. Tonight, all of that was far away. As she swirled around the dance floor, a man caught her eye. He stood across the room, watching her with a confident smile. He was tall, with a well-groomed beard, and dressed in a sharp dark suit that looked like it cost more than Monica's entire wardrobe. His eyes were deep and intense, but there was a certain charm in the way he looked at her, as if he already knew her. Monica felt a flutter in her chest. She tried to ignore the feeling, but her eyes kept drifting back to him. It wasn't long before he approached her, his smile warm and inviting. "Hi," he said smoothly, his voice rich and confident. "I couldn't help but notice you. I'm Stanley." Monica smiled, feeling a bit nervous but also flattered. "Hi, I'm Monica." Stanley's eyes glinted as he looked her over, his gaze lingering on her gown and her heels. "You look amazing, Monica. You fit right in here." She chuckled. "Thanks. I'm still trying to get used to all of this. It's kind of overwhelming." Stanley nodded knowingly. "It can be, but once you're in, you're in. I think you'll do just fine." Monica felt a surge of hope. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. Stanley was exactly the type of person she had been hoping to meet at a party like this. Someone who was well-connected, wealthy, and influential. Maybe he could help her get where she wanted to go. After some casual conversation, Stanley leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "There's an exclusive after-party. It's a bit more private, but I think you'd enjoy it. I'd love for you to come with me." Monica hesitated for a second. Her mother's warning flashed in her mind, but she quickly pushed it away. This was her chance to step up. This could be the break she needed. I'd love to, she said, her excitement building once again. Stanley smiled, taking her hand gently. Great. Let's go. As they walked toward the exit of the penthouse, Monica felt a rush of exhilaration. She was leaving behind the bright, bustling party for something more exclusive, more private, where the real opportunities might lie. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was ready for whatever came next. Tonight she was stepping into a world of luxury and success. The night air outside was warm, filled with the sounds of the city that never seemed to sleep. Monica and Stanley walked down the sleek marble steps of the penthouse, making their way to a waiting Tesla parked just outside. The car gleamed under the streetlights, its dark tint and shiny exterior a stark contrast to the hustle of Lagos around them. Stanley opened the door for Monica with a flourish, his smile charming and confident. As she slid into the plush leather seat, the car's interior greeted her like something out of a dream, luxurious, futuristic, and unbelievably quiet. Stanley followed and settled into the driver's seat, starting the car with a soft hum. Ready for something special? He asked, his voice smooth like the hum of the engine. He didn't wait for her to answer before pressing a button, and the sound of music filled the air. It was a playlist of smooth, upbeat tunes, the kind that made her feel like she was in a movie scene. Monica leaned back into the seat, her heart still racing with excitement. This was it. The after-party would be even more glamorous, even more exclusive than the one they had just left. She had heard whispers of these kinds of events, the places where the richest and most powerful people of Lagos gathered in secret. Tonight she was stepping into that world. As they sped through the streets of the city, Monica's eyes wandered out the window. The lights of Lagos were dazzling, flickering like stars in the distance, reflecting off the sleek buildings and busy roads. It was a world she had dreamed of being a part of, and now she was here. But a tiny part of her mind wondered if it was all too good to be true. Stanley glanced over at her, catching her distracted gaze. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice light but with a hint of curiosity. Monica smiled, trying to shake off the small voice of doubt. "Just thinking about how different everything feels. It's like stepping into another world." Stanley chuckled softly. "It is. But don't worry, you'll get used to it. People like us belong in this world. We know how to make things happen." Monica nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was one of the chosen few, the ones who could rise above the struggles of everyday life. She was so tired of working hard just to survive. Here in this world everything was easy, at least it seemed that way. The car sped through the city, weaving past other vehicles as they made their way to the outskirts of Lagos. Monica's mind was still buzzing with thoughts of the party, of the wealth and success that surrounded her. Stanley was handsome, rich, and connected everything she needed to make her dreams a reality. But as they drove deeper into the city, away from the familiar roads, a sense of unease began to creep in. Monica noticed the houses and buildings becoming smaller, the lights dimming. It felt like they were leaving the vibrant heart of Lagos behind and entering an unknown world. Stanley seemed unfazed. "Almost there," he said, his tone as casual as ever. He turned up the music and kept his eyes on the road, but Monica couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The night was growing darker and the air in the car seemed to shift, becoming heavy as if the atmosphere was changing. The sleek Tesla zipped around a corner and suddenly, they were no longer surrounded by the lights and sounds of the city. The mansion in front of them was large and imposing, set against the backdrop of a shadowy forest. Its tall iron gates were closed, but as they approached, the gates opened silently, revealing a long, winding driveway that led up to the grand house. Monica's heart skipped a beat. The house was stunning, its modern architecture standing out against the dark night sky. But there was something eerie about it. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the large windows, and there was a sense of quiet that felt almost unnatural. It wasn't the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the party she had just left. This place felt cold, distant, and secretive. Stanley parked the car in front of the mansion, cutting the engine. He turned to Monica, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to the real party," he said softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Monica's heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from excitement, it was from unease. She had never seen a place like this before, and the change in Stanley's demeanor did nothing to reassure her. There was a shift in his eyes, something colder, more distant. She felt a flicker of doubt, but she quickly shook it off. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. As she stepped out of the car, she tried to steady her nerves. The mansion loomed ahead, its massive doors standing open as if inviting her inside. The sound of voices drifted out, but they weren't as cheerful as the ones she had heard at the first party. These voices were quieter, more subdued, as if people were speaking in hushed tones. Stanley took her hand again, leading her up the marble steps to the door. Monica followed him inside, her pulse quickening with every step. The mansion was just as grand on the inside, an open foyer with towering columns, expensive artwork lining the walls, and luxurious furniture scattered throughout. But the atmosphere was different. There was a strange chill in the air, a sense of something hidden beneath the surface. Monica glanced around, her eyes falling on the faces of the people in the room. They were dressed in similar designer clothes, but there was an intensity to their gaze, as if they were watching her every move. The air was thick with tension, and Monica couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Stanley leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his voice low and cold. Monica froze. His words didn't make sense. She had come for fun, for a chance to be part of something bigger. But now she wasn't so sure. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and a shiver ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. But Stanley only smiled, a cold, unsettling smile. "You'll see soon enough," he said, his eyes glinting with something dark. The laughter from the crowd around them faded into whispers, and Monica suddenly felt very, very alone. She tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach, but the weight of the room was too much. She had just stepped into a nightmare, and she was too far in to turn back now. Monica's heart thudded in her chest as Stanley led her deeper into the mansion. She had entered with excitement and hope, but now a dark sense of dread was slowly creeping in, wrapping itself around her like an invisible chain. Every step she took seemed to echo in the vast, cold hallways, amplifying the unease gnawing at her. The guests in the room were no longer laughing or chatting as they had at the first party. The mood had shifted. The air was thick with something heavier now, something Monica couldn't quite put her finger on. People were gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, their eyes occasionally flickering toward her as if they were sizing her up. A chill ran down her spine, and she instinctively stepped closer to Stanley, seeking some comfort, some sense of safety in the sea of strangers. Stanley didn't seem to notice her growing discomfort. His eyes were fixed ahead, his expression unreadable. He walked with a confident air, as if this place was just another stop on a well-worn path. The people around them parted like waves as they passed, but their eyes remained fixed on Monica, their gazes cold and calculating. "Where are we going?" Monica asked, her voice betraying the unease she felt. She had tried to push it down, but the atmosphere of the house was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Stanley glanced over at her, his smile almost reassuring, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just relax," he said, his tone smooth. "You're going to love this part. It's the best part of the night." Monica nodded, but her hands were shaking. She had hoped this night would be her escape, her chance to finally break free of the struggles that had followed her in Lagos. But now, the more she thought about it, the more she realized something wasn't right. The party didn't feel like a celebration, it felt like a trap. As they walked further into the mansion, the sounds of whispers grew louder, more urgent. She could make out snatches of conversation, but the words didn't make sense. Phrases like "it's time," "the offering," and "tonight's the night" drifted through the air, sending her heart into a panic. They reached a door at the end of the hall. Stanley opened it without a second thought and gestured for Monica to enter. She hesitated, looking up at him, but his smile remained, though it had lost its warmth. "Go on," he said. "You're going to love this." Monica stepped forward, her legs heavy with fear. The moment she crossed the threshold, a wave of coldness hit her. The room was dimly lit, with only a few candles casting flickering shadows along the walls. In the center of the room was a large, circular table, surrounded by people who stood silently, their faces obscured by the dim light. They were all dressed in black, their clothing elegant but unsettling. They seemed to be waiting for something, for someone. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed the strange symbols painted on the walls. They were intricate and dark, their meaning unclear, but their presence was enough to make her skin crawl. The energy in the room felt heavy, suffocating. The kind of energy you couldn't ignore, like a storm gathering in the distance, ready to break. Stanley followed her into the room, his eyes scanning the gathering, his demeanor unchanged. Monica felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Stanley didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the table, his eyes meeting the others in the room. Monica's heart pounded harder in her chest as she realized they were all watching her now. The air grew thick with anticipation. "You're a special guest," Stanley finally said, his voice no longer smooth but cold and hollow. "And you've been chosen." Monica's blood ran cold. "Chosen? Chosen for what?" Before she could say anything more, the people around the table began to speak in low unison voices. The words were unfamiliar, chanting in a language she didn't recognize. Her mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, but fear was clouding her thoughts. She wanted to run, to flee the mansion and never look back, but her legs felt frozen to the spot. Stanley stepped forward, standing beside the table now, his face set in an emotionless mask. "This is where the real power is," he said softly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. "The people here, they have influence, wealth beyond anything you can imagine. But that comes at a price." Monica's throat tightened, her mind desperately trying to process his words. "What do you mean? What are they doing?" Stanley turned to her, his expression darkening. "They don't just want money or fame, Monica. They want something far more valuable." The chanting grew louder and Monica's pulse quickened. She felt a presence in the room, a heaviness that was suffocating, oppressive. The people around her began to move, slowly, deliberately, as if preparing for something monumental. Monica's mind was racing now, her instincts screaming for her to leave. She had to get out, she had to. One of the figures at the table turned toward her, their face now visible in the flickering candlelight. The face was blank, devoid of emotion, but their eyes were cold, empty. They fixed Monica with an unblinking stare, and it was then that she understood. This wasn't a party. This wasn't an after-party. This was something far darker. Something she had never imagined in her wildest dreams. They were not here for a good time. They were here for something far more sinister. Stanley's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're part of the ritual now," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're the offering." Monica's heart stopped. Her mind refused to believe what she was hearing. Offering? What kind of twisted, horrifying thing was this? Panic surged through her, and for the first time she could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on her. This was no longer a chance for wealth or fame. This was a fight for her life. She turned toward the door, desperate to run, but the people around the table moved in unison, blocking her path. Their eyes were now filled with a strange hunger, a cold, unfeeling hunger that sent a wave of nausea through Monica. She was trapped. And she realized with a sickening certainty that she had been lured into a nightmare. Monica's mind raced as she backed away from the table, her legs trembling beneath her. Her heart hammered against her chest like a wild animal trying to escape, and every instinct screamed for her to run. But where could she go? The door was blocked, the people around her were closing in, and Stanley, the man who had promised her excitement and luxury, now stood as one of them, cold, calculating, and unrecognizable. The chanting grew louder, their voices intertwining in an eerie, hypnotic rhythm. The words were foreign, alien, and the very sound of them seemed to ripple through the room, reverberating in Monica's bones. She felt as though the walls were closing in, the air thick with an oppressive energy that threatened to crush her. Stanley stepped forward, his eyes dark with something Monica couldn't comprehend. "You think this is just a party, don't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost pitying. "But you've stepped into something far bigger. This isn't about money, fame, or luxury. This is about power, true power." Monica's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to understand what was happening. "No, this isn't real," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real." But the faces around her told a different story. The people who had once seemed so glamorous, so enticing, now appeared like shadows, their features twisted by the dim light, their eyes cold and empty. They didn't look like humans anymore, they looked like predators, and she was the prey. One of them, a woman with sharp features and dark, hollow eyes, stepped forward. She raised her hands and the chanting stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening, as if the world itself had held its breath. Monica felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. She wanted to be brave, wanted to believe that she could escape, that she could fight back, but every part of her screamed that she was powerless. The woman smiled, a thin, cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We want what you promised," she said softly, her voice slithering through the air. "You came here because you wanted something more, didn't you? You wanted to escape your struggles, your ordinary life. You wanted to be part of something bigger, something that only a few people in this world are lucky enough to touch." Monica's throat tightened. She had come to Lagos to escape the life that had held her back. She had hoped that by rubbing shoulders with the wealthy and powerful, she could change her future. But this was far beyond anything she had imagined. This was not the escape she had dreamed of. She glanced around the room, desperate for an out, but the eyes of the people around her were fixed on her with an almost hungry intensity. They weren't interested in her dreams of wealth. No, they wanted something far more disturbing. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breath. "You don't have to do this. You can get out of this." Stanley stepped forward again, his expression almost unreadable. "You have no choice," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "You were chosen. It's already done." The room seemed to spin as Monica's mind struggled to process the reality of her situation. The energy around her was thick, almost suffocating, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. This wasn't a party or an after-party. It was a ritual, a dark and twisted one that she had walked into without knowing the cost. Her eyes flicked back to the woman who had spoken earlier. The woman raised her hands again, and this time, Monica felt a strange pull, an invisible force tugging at her. The people around the table began to move in unison, their hands stretching toward her as though they were reaching for something only they could see. "No," Monica gasped, her voice cracking as she took a step back. "I don't belong here. I didn't sign up for this." But the woman's smile only widened. "You may not have known what you were getting into, but that doesn't change the fact that you are here now. And we don't let people leave once they've crossed this threshold." Monica's pulse quickened as panic surged through her. She turned to Stanley, her eyes pleading. "Stanley, please, please, I don't want this. I don't want any part of it. Help me. Help me get out of here." But Stanley only stared at her, his expression distant, cold. "You should have listened to me when I told you not to come," he said, his voice empty of emotion. "There's no way out now." Monica's hands shook as she desperately looked for a way out, but the walls of the mansion seemed to close in around her. The room was becoming smaller, the people around her more menacing. The chanting started again, louder this time, and Monica felt the oppressive weight of it pressing on her chest, suffocating her. In that moment she realized that she wasn't just a guest. She was the sacrifice. The woman raised her hands, and suddenly, Monica felt a rush of cold air hit her like a physical force. She staggered backward, her heart racing as the people around her stepped closer, their eyes now glowing with a strange, unnatural light. Their hands reached for her, their fingers outstretched, as if they were claiming her for something she couldn't escape. Monica felt the walls around her begin to close in. She tried to move, to run, but her legs were frozen. Fear had paralyzed her. This was not a game. It was not a party. It was a trap. A trap designed for her. And there was no way out. Her chest tightened as she gasped for breath, the weight of the room's energy pressing against her with every passing second. She had made a mistake, a grave mistake, and now there was no turning back. All she could do was wait for whatever was coming, her body trembling with terror as the dark figures moved closer. In the distance she heard a faint voice, her mother's voice, warning her to be careful. The words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the innocence she had lost by ignoring the warning signs. She had been warned, but it was too late now. As the figures drew near, Monica's mind flashed to everything she had ever dreamed of her mother, the hope she had carried, the vision of escaping her struggles. All of that seemed so far away now, swallowed by the darkness surrounding her. And in that moment she realized she had to fight back. She had to find the strength to escape, to break free from the ritual that held her captive. But how? Monica's heart was pounding in her chest, her breath shallow, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. The dark figures around her continued to close in, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, their hands outstretched as if they were drawing closer to claim her as part of their ritual. She was trapped, caught in the web of something far darker than she had ever imagined. But then, just as she felt she could no longer breathe under the weight of the fear and pressure pressing down on her, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just going to stand there and let them take her. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. Monica's eyes darted around the room, her mind racing to find some way to escape. She had no idea how, but she had to get out. She had to break free from this nightmare before it was too late. Her thoughts flashed to her mother's warning, those words she had brushed off in her rush for a better life. Stay at home, Monica. Be careful. Trust in God. She had laughed it off, too eager to escape the struggles that had defined her life in Lagos. But now, standing in the middle of a dark, dangerous ritual, those words suddenly made all the sense in the world. God, she thought. I need your help. A wave of calm washed over her as she called out to God in the silence of her mind, pleading for strength. She knew she couldn't do this on her own. She wasn't strong enough to fight this evil with her own power, but she didn't need to be. She had faith. And that faith, she realized, was the only weapon she had left. In the blink of an eye, something inside her shifted. The suffocating weight of fear and darkness that had been pressing in on her seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet strength that came from deep within. It was as if she could feel the presence of something greater than herself surrounding her, lifting her up, giving her the courage she needed to take action. Monica's eyes locked on the people around her, the ritualistic figures who had once seemed so terrifying. Now they no longer held power over her. She could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty that had once been masked by their cold, calculating expressions. They weren't invincible. They were just people hiding behind darkness, hiding behind fear. But they were not as strong as her faith. With renewed determination, Monica took a step forward. The people surrounding her faltered, their hands pausing mid-air. They were no longer moving in unison. The force that had once pulled at her seemed to weaken, and she could feel their control slipping away. She could feel the presence of God with her, guiding her, strengthening her. It was like a light had been switched on in the darkness. The room seemed to brighten, as if the very air around her was filled with something holy, something powerful. Stanley, who had stood by silently, now seemed shaken. His eyes flicked toward her, his face a mask of disbelief. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice trembling. "You were supposed to be the offering." Monica shook her head, her heart filled with a newfound clarity. "I'm not your offering," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "I'm God's child. And you can't have me." The words echoed in the room, carrying with them a strength that even Monica didn't fully understand. But she felt it. She could feel the shift in the energy around her. The chanting had stopped, the atmosphere now heavy with tension, but it was no longer the suffocating darkness that had held her captive. It was lighter now, as though a door had opened and let the light in. For the first time, Monica felt in control. She was no longer the frightened girl caught in the web of evil forces. She was stronger than that. She was protected, and with that realization, the fear that had once paralyzed her began to fade. The figures around her began to retreat, their eyes wide with fear. They had expected her to break, to become part of their twisted ritual. But Monica was no longer the frightened girl they had thought they could control. Stanley stepped back, his eyes darting nervously between her and the others. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You can't stop us." But Monica held her ground. She was no longer just a spectator in her own life. She had fought through the darkness, and now, with her faith as her shield, she was unstoppable. "I don't need to stop you," Monica replied, her voice calm yet unwavering. "I just need to leave." The room seemed to freeze for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then, with a final glance at the retreating figures, Monica turned and walked toward the door. It was as if the very walls themselves were parting to let her through. The mansion, once a symbol of dread, now seemed to lose its power, its dark grip loosening with every step she took. When Monica stepped out of the door, the cool night air hit her like a breath of fresh air. She didn't look back. She knew that the darkness behind her had no hold over her anymore. It had tried to break her, to trap her in a world of fear and shadows, but she had found her way out. She had found her strength in faith, and that was something no darkness could ever take from her. The night outside felt different now. The city of Lagos, once overwhelming and full of promise, now seemed like a world of possibility again, a world where Monica could start fresh, a world where she could live her life with purpose, faith, and strength. The luxury she had once craved no longer seemed important. What mattered was that she had survived. She had overcome the darkness, and she was stronger for it. Monica took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night's events slowly lift off her shoulders. She had fought for her life, for her freedom, and she had won. As she walked away from the mansion, her heart swelled with gratitude. She hadn't just escaped the clutches of evil, she had found a deeper faith, a deeper understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. And as she walked into the night, she knew that her journey was just beginning. Her faith had been tested and she had come out victorious. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: she would never walk it alone.